The crystal spires of Zenthari Prime pierced the purple sky like massive needles of light. Each tower hummed with ancient power, their surfaces reflecting the twin suns that bathed the planet in eternal twilight. Today marked the 1000th cycle, since the last great gathering, and representatives from across the galaxy had come to witness the Millennium Assembly. High Counselor Vex Thera of the Zilithian Empire adjusted her flowing robes as she glided into the grand chamber. Her pale blue skin shimmered in the artificial light, and her 4 eyes scanned the assembled delegates with practiced arrogance. The Zilithians had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and Vexithara carried herself like nobility, shoulded with absolute certainty of her superiority. Across the circular chamber, the Vorthan representatives stood in perfect formation. Their gray insect-like bodies remained motionless as their compound eyes processed every detail of the room. Supreme Calculator Zeth9 led their delegation, his mechanical voice translating emotional concepts into mathematical probabilities. The Vorthans believed in order above all else, and chaos was simply an equation waiting to be solved. The Crex Dominion had claimed the eastern section of the chamber. General Thakmor, his scarred red hide bearing the marks of 100 battles, sat with military precision. His people were warriors first and everything else second. They respected only strength, and had built their empire by crushing anyone who dared to stand against them. Smaller delegations filled the remaining spaces. The aquatic depth singers floated in their environmental suits, humming low songs that translated as polite greetings. The energy beings called luminals flickered between visible and invisible states, their thoughts appearing as brief flashes of colored light. Dozens of other species completed the assembly, each representing their own corner of galactic civilization. At the center of the chamber stood the archive pillar, a massive crystal that contained the memories and wisdom of extinct civilizations. Most delegates ignored it, considering the dead past irrelevant to the living present. But today was different. Today, the archive would speak. High Counselor Vexithara called the assembly to order with a gesture that commanded instant attention. Her voice carried across the chamber without amplification, a trick of Zilithian biology that never failed to impress lesser species. We gather as our ancestors did, to share knowledge and maintain the peace that has blessed our galaxy for 1,000 cycles, she began. The old threats are gone, the young species remain contained, and civilization flourishes under proper guidance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The current order had indeed brought peace, the peace of the strong ruling the weak, of established powers maintaining their positions, of potential threats being eliminated before they could grow dangerous. Supreme Calculator. Zeth9 rose to his feet, his mechanical joints clicking softly. The Vorthon Collective has calculated a 97.3% probability of continued stability for the next 1,000 cycles. New species development remains within acceptable parameters. No significant threats have been identified. General Thakmor snorted, a sound like grinding stone. My scouts have found nothing worth conquering in the outer spiral arms. Just primitives, playing with fire and stone tools. The galaxy belongs to those strong enough to hold it. The other delegates nodded in satisfaction. Everything was as it should be. Civilization was safe, order was maintained, and the future looked bright for those who deserved it. Then the archive pillar began to glow. The ancient crystal pulsed with deep blue light, patterns of energy swirling through its crystalline structure like trapped lightning. The chamber fell silent as delegates turned to stare at the awakening relic. Most had never seen the archive activate. Some wondered if it was malfunctioning. The light grew brighter, and slowly a figure began to take shape above the pillar. It was tall and thin, with skin like polished bronze and eyes that held the weight of eons. Its clothes were simple but elegant, cut in a style that predated every current civilization. This was Elder Kethvar of the predecessors, the first species to achieve galactic civilization, and the last to voluntarily disappear into history. Children of the stars, the elder's voice echoed strangely, as if speaking across vast distances of time. I bring warning from those who came before. High Counselor Vexithara frowned, The archive rarely activated, and when it did, it usually shared scientific data or historical records. Direct communication was unprecedented. "Honored Elder," she said carefully, "what warning do you bring? Our civilization is strong. Our peace is secure." The Elder's ancient eyes swept across the assembled delegates, and many felt an uncomfortable chill. "Your peace is an illusion. Your strength is brittle. A storm approaches that will reshape everything you believe about power and survival." Supreme Calculator. Zeth9's mechanical mind immediately began analyzing the statement. "Please, provide specific data regarding this threat. What species, what technology, what timeline for contact?" The Elder raised one hand and images began appearing in the air around the chamber. A small blue world spinning around a yellow star. Vast oceans and green continents. Cities of glass and metal spreading across the surface like geometric patterns. "They call their world Earth," the Elder said. "Third planet from their star, in what you term the Orion Arm. They call themselves human." General Thakmor leaned forward, his warrior instincts engaged. The images showed cities, but also something else. Vast complexes that could only be military installations, vehicles that moved through air and water, structures that reached toward the stars. "Show me their weapons," he growled. "Show me their armies." The Elder gestured and new images appeared, but instead of massive war machines or energy weapons, the delegates saw something far stranger. Humans, bipedal mammals with soft skin and no natural weapons, walking through environments that should have killed them. Humans in frozen wastelands, building shelters from ice and hunting creatures 10 times their size. Humans in burning deserts finding water where none should exist. Humans in dense jungles turning poisonous plants into medicine. "This is their weapon," the Elder said quietly. "They adapt. They survive. They refuse to accept that anything is impossible." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. High Counselor Vexithara studied the images with growing bewilderment. These creatures had no scales, no chitin, no natural armor. Their claws were tiny, their teeth were blunt, and they seemed utterly fragile. "Honored Elder," she said slowly, "surely you do not suggest that these mammals pose a threat to galactic civilization? They appear to be primitives who have barely learned to leave their own world." The Elder's expression grew sad. "That is what we thought. That is what every species has thought when they first encountered humanity, and that is why they are so dangerous." Supreme Calculator. Zeth9's compound eyes clicked as they focused on the images. "Impossible. Biological adaptation requires thousands of generations. No species can change their fundamental nature quickly enough to survive in multiple incompatible environments." "Yet they do," the Elder replied. "Watch." The images shifted, showing human history in rapid succession. Ice ages that should have wiped them out but didn't. Volcanic eruptions that should have ended their civilization but didn't. Plagues that should have destroyed their species but didn't. Each catastrophe was followed by recovery, growth, and expansion into new territories. "They do not adapt through evolution alone," the Elder explained. "They adapt through learning. They adapt through cooperation. They adapt through sheer stubborn refusal to die." General Thakmor stood up, his scarred fists clenched. "Impossible. No species survives through weakness, only the strong endure." The Elder turned to face the Crex general directly. "You define strength as the ability to destroy your enemies. Humans define strength as the ability to turn enemies into friends. You build your power by crushing others beneath you. Humans build their power by lifting others up beside them." "Ridiculous," Vexithara snapped. "Civilization requires hierarchy. Order demands that the superior guide the inferior. These humans sound like anarchists." The Elder's ancient face showed something that might have been amusement. "Tell me, High Counselor, how many species serve in your government by choice rather than conquest?" Vexithara's 4 eyes narrowed. "The Zilithian Empire provides guidance to lesser species for their own benefit. They serve because we know what is best for them. And you, Supreme Calculator. The Elder turned to Zeth-9. How many of your subject species requested to join the Vorthan Collective? The mechanical being's voice carried no emotion, but his pause was telling. The Collective incorporates species based on efficiency calculations. Personal preferences are irrelevant variables. And you, General? The Elder faced Thakmor last. How many worlds joined the Crex Dominion without being conquered first? The red-skinned warrior's laugh was harsh. None, as it should be. The weak exist to serve the strong. The Elder nodded slowly. Then you understand nothing of true strength. Let me show you what I mean. The images changed again, showing humans in situations that should have been hopeless. Small groups facing overwhelming odds, individuals standing against impossible circumstances, entire populations refusing to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. They landed on a beach in a place called Normandy, the Elder narrated, showing humans storming fortified positions despite devastating losses. The logical choice was retreat. They advanced anyway. They were trapped in a city called Stalingrad. The images shifted to show urban warfare among ruins. The logical choice was surrender. They fought anyway. They were told their species would never fly. The new images showed primitive aircraft lifting off the ground. The logical choice was to accept this limitation. They flew anyway. Supreme Calculator. Zeth-9's mechanical mind struggled to process what he was seeing. These actions are statistically improbable. No rational species would accept such casualties for minimal strategic gain. That is exactly the point, the Elder said. Humans are not always rational. They are something far more dangerous. They are determined. The assembled delegates began to shift uncomfortably. The images were impressive, but these were clearly primitive conflicts fought with crude weapons. Modern galactic civilization possessed technology that could sterilize worlds from orbit. General Thakmor voiced what many were thinking. These historical examples are irrelevant, Elder. Whatever these humans achieved among themselves, they would be helpless against modern military technology. A single Crex battlecruiser could conquer their entire world. The Elder's bronze face grew grim. That is what we thought as well. That is what we told ourselves when we first encountered them 50,000 years ago. The chamber fell silent. 50,000 years ago was when the predecessors had vanished from galactic history, leaving behind only ruins and legends. You met them? High Counselor Vexithara's voice was barely a whisper. We met them when they were even more primitive than they are now, the Elder confirmed. Stone tools, cave dwellings, no technology beyond fire and sharp rocks. We decided to guide their development, to shape them into useful servants for our empire. The hologram flickered, showing glimpses of an ancient civilization far more advanced than anything in the current galaxy. Cities that floated among the clouds, ships that sailed between stars like ancient vessels crossing oceans, technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics. We had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, the Elder continued. We had shaped thousands of species to serve our needs. We thought humans would be just another addition to our empire. What happened? Supreme Calculator Zeth-9 asked, though his mechanical voice suggested he was calculating answers he didn't want to find. The Elder's image began to fade slightly, as if the effort of speaking across time was growing too great. They learned. Everything we taught them, they learned. Everything we showed them, they improved upon. Everything we thought impossible, they made possible. But surely your superior technology, Vexithara began. Technology can be copied, the Elder interrupted. Weapons can be stolen. Ships can be captured and reverse-engineered. But the human spirit, their refusal to accept defeat, their ability to find hope in hopeless situations, their talent for inspiring others to fight for something better, that cannot be conquered. The images around the chamber showed glimpses of an ancient war. Predecessor ships burning in space, human fleets built from salvaged technology, worlds in rebellion, civilizations choosing freedom over security. In the end, the elder said quietly. They did not destroy us. They liberated us. They freed us from our own empire, showed us that our way of ruling through fear and domination was poisoning everything we touched. We chose to disappear rather than face the galaxy we had created. General Thakmor slammed his fist on his seat. Impossible. No primitive species could defeat a galactic empire. The elder's fading form looked directly at the Crex general. They did not defeat us through superior firepower, General. They defeated us by making our own subjects believe they deserved better than slavery. The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates shouted questions and denials. How could mammals without claws or fangs threaten armored warriors? How could creatures that lived barely a century challenge species that had endured for millennia? How could emotional, irrational beings overcome the cold logic of superior technology? But even as they protested, some delegates were beginning to feel a cold fear settling in their minds. The elders' words carried the weight of absolute truth, and the images they had seen suggested capabilities that shouldn't have existed. High Counselor Vexithera raised her hand for silence, and slowly, the chamber quieted. Elder Kethvar, she said formally, assuming your warning has merit, what do you suggest we do about these humans? The elder's form was now barely visible, more memory than substance. Do not underestimate them. Do not dismiss them as primitives. And above all, do not give them a reason to see you as oppressors. Are you suggesting we should fear mammals who haven't even mastered faster-than-light travel? General Thakmor's voice dripped with contempt. The elder's last words echoed in the chamber as his image finally faded. I am suggesting that if you threaten what they love, they will move the very stars to stop you. And they will succeed. The archive pillar's light dimmed and went dark, leaving the delegates in uncomfortable silence. For long moments, nobody spoke. The warning hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Finally, High Counselor Vexithara broke the silence with a laugh that sounded forced even to her own ears. Well, she said, I suppose even the great predecessors had their moments of paranoia. Surely none of you believe that mammals without natural weapons could threaten our civilizations? Supreme Calculator Zeth9's mechanical voice clicked as he processed the data. The mathematical probability of a pre-spaceflight species threatening established galactic powers is 0.0001%. The Elder's warnings appear to be based on outdated information and emotional rather than logical analysis. General Thakmor's laughter was harsh and mocking. The predecessors were soft. They ruled through technology instead of strength. No wonder they fell to primitives. The Crex dominion would crush these humans like insects. Around the chamber, other delegates began to chuckle and murmur agreement. The tension that had built during the Elder's warning began to dissipate, replaced by the comfortable certainty of superior species looking down on inferior ones. Besides, Vexithera added, what could possibly go wrong? If these humans are truly in the Orion Arm, they're thousands of light-years away from civilized space. By the time they develop interstellar travel, if they ever do, they'll encounter proper guidance from their betters. The Millennium Assembly moved on to other business, dismissing the Elder's warning as the paranoid delusions of an extinct species. But in the depths of the archive pillar, ancient crystal memory banks hummed with stored data about a small blue world and its impossible inhabitants. The warning had been given. The truth had been spoken. In 3 solar cycles, long-range scouts would discover Earth and its sprawling human civilization. The Council's laughter would prove to be premature. Commander Thackrell adjusted his battle armor as the Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The red-scaled Crex warrior felt excitement building in his chest as his sensors began cataloging the human homeworld. After 3 cycles of debate following the Millennium Assembly, the Galactic Council had finally decided to deal with the human problem that Elder Kethvar had warned them about. General Thakmor himself had selected Thackrell for this honor. The younger Crex had proven his worth in dozens of campaigns against primitive worlds. His tactics were simple and effective: show overwhelming force, crush any resistance, and establish dominance quickly. It had worked on every world he had conquered. There was no reason to expect this backward planet to be any different. Report, Thackrell growled as his aide approached. Initial scans confirm the Elder's data, Commander, Lieutenant Vexka said, her scaled fingers dancing over the sensor controls. Single star system, third planet shows massive population centers and industrial development. No sign of faster than light capability, but they do have primitive spacecraft in orbit. Thackrell studied the tactical display floating before him. Earth hung in space like a blue-green jewel, completely unaware that 50 Crex warships had just arrived to claim it. The orbital installations were laughably primitive. Chemical rockets, metal space stations, communication satellites that couldn't even detect his cloaked fleet. Energy signatures? He asked. Atomic fission and fusion reactions detected across the planet's surface, his weapons officer reported. They have nuclear technology, but nothing that could threaten our shields. Their most powerful weapons appear to be fusion-based missiles with yields in the hundreds of kilotons. Thackrell's mandibles clicked in amusement. His flagship alone could survive direct impact from their entire nuclear arsenal. The other 49 ships in his fleet were simply insurance against the impossible. Communications? Multiple radio and microwave frequencies, Commander. Primitive digital networks spanning the globe. We have successfully infiltrated their information systems and downloaded their languages, cultural data, and military capabilities. The young Crex studied the translated files with growing satisfaction. These humans had indeed conquered their homeworld, just as the Elder had claimed. But they had done so with crude chemical weapons, metal vehicles, and projectile firearms. Their most advanced military technology was barely superior to what the Crex had been using when they first achieved spaceflight thousands of years ago. Any sign they've detected our arrival? None, Commander. Their sensor technology cannot penetrate our stealth fields. To them, we remain invisible. Perfect. Thackrell loved when a conquest began with complete tactical surprise. He had studied human military history during the journey to Sol, and their primitive conflicts showed they valued something they called honor in warfare. They announced their attacks fought during daylight and tried to minimize civilian casualties. Such weakness would make them easy to defeat. Prepare the demonstration, he ordered. Select a military target, something significant but not crucial, to planetary infrastructure. We want to shock them into surrender, not destroy our future slaves. His tactical officer highlighted several options on the display. The installation they call NORAD appears to be their primary military command center, or we could target one of their major naval bases. NORAD, Thackrell decided. Send a message to their leadership first. Standard surrender demand. Give them one rotation to comply before we begin the demonstration. The message was transmitted on all human communication frequencies simultaneously. Thackrell had used the same template on dozens of worlds, modified slightly for local customs and language. Inhabitants of the planet you call Earth. I am Commander Thackrell of the Crex Dominion, representing the Galactic Council. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our empire. You have 24 of your time periods called hours to surrender unconditionally. All military forces must stand down. All governmental authorities must prepare for transfer of power to Crex administrators. Compliance will be rewarded with minimal casualties. Resistance will result in the complete subjugation of your species. Choose wisely. The response came within minutes, broadcast from multiple locations across Earth simultaneously. Thackrell expected confused questions, desperate pleas for mercy, or perhaps formal surrender documents. Instead, he received something he had never encountered in any previous conquest. Laughter, not just from one source, but from hundreds. Human leaders around the world were actually laughing at his surrender demand. News broadcasts showed human military officers shaking their heads and chuckling. Their politicians made jokes about little green men and bad science fiction movies. Thackrell's aide looked confused. Commander, perhaps their translation systems are malfunctioning. They don't seem to understand the severity of their situation. But the tactical display showed otherwise. Human military forces around the globe were moving to high alert status. Their primitive aircraft were scrambling into defensive formations. Their naval vessels were heading for open ocean. Their ground forces were digging into defensive positions. They understood the threat perfectly. They were laughing anyway. "Sir," his communications officer said nervously, "we're receiving a response from their primary military command. It appears to be addressed to you personally. Put it through." The image that appeared on his screen showed a human in military dress, clearly a high-ranking officer based on the decorations on his uniform. The man appeared to be in his 60s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes that held no trace of fear. "Commander Thackrell," the human said calmly. "I am General Marcus Chen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the United Nations Military Command. I've received your surrender demand, and I'm afraid I have to decline." Thackrell's mandibles clicked in irritation. "General Chen, you clearly do not understand your situation. I command 50 warships, each capable of destroying your largest cities. You have no defense against our technology." "You're probably right about that," Chen agreed cheerfully. "Your ships are invisible to our sensors. Your weapons are undoubtedly superior to ours, and you could probably kill most of us without breaking a sweat." "Then you will surrender?" Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Hell no." The transmission ended, leaving Thackrell staring at a blank screen. In 47 successful conquests, no species had ever simply refused to surrender while acknowledging their complete tactical disadvantage. It made no logical sense. "Perhaps they require a demonstration," Lieutenant Vexka suggested. Thackrell nodded grimly. "Target NORAD. Single plasma burst, minimum yield, just enough to vaporize their mountain." The attack was perfectly executed. A lance of superheated plasma struck the Cheyenne Mountain complex and carved through solid rock like a knife through flesh. The entire military installation disappeared in a flash of blue light, leaving behind only a perfectly circular crater half a mile deep. Human communication networks erupted in chaos. Emergency broadcasts filled the airwaves. Their primitive satellites transmitted desperate messages to anyone who might be listening. For the first time since arriving in the Sol system, Thackrell felt satisfied. Now they would understand the price of defiance. The next message from Earth came from the same General Chen, broadcasting from what appeared to be a different location. The human looked tired, but still showed no signs of fear. "Commander Thackrell," Chen said formally, "thank you for the demonstration. You have successfully destroyed NORAD and killed approximately 3,000 of our people. I hope you're satisfied." "I am prepared to be reasonable, General," Thackrell replied. "Surrender now, and there will be no further casualties." "I'm afraid that's not going to happen," Chen said. "You see, Commander, you've just made a serious mistake." "What mistake?" "I have demonstrated our superiority. Further resistance is futile." Chen's expression grew cold. "Your mistake, Commander, was killing 3,000 people who were just doing their jobs. People with families, people with children, people who never did anything to hurt you or your species. They were military personnel defending a strategic installation," Thackrell protested. "Their deaths were a legitimate act of war." "Maybe," Chen said. "But you made it personal. You see, Commander, you obviously studied our military capabilities before you came here. Did you also study our history? Of course, your species has a long record of primitive conflicts using crude weapons. Then you should know that we have a saying on Earth: you can kill the man, but you can't kill the idea. Another one is, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." Thackrell was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. "Your philosophical sayings are irrelevant, General. You cannot fight our technology with primitive weapons." Chen smiled, and for the first time, Thackrell noticed it didn't reach the human's eyes. "Commander, let me tell you something about human beings. We're not the strongest species on our planet. We're not the fastest or the most agile or the best adapted to any particular environment. We don't have claws or fangs or armor plating. But we have one thing that your species apparently doesn't understand. And what is that? We're mean." "Sir," his sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting unusual activity across the planet's surface." "What kind of activity?" "It appears that their military forces are dispersing. Instead of concentrating for defense, they're scattering into small groups and moving to concealed positions. Thackrell studied the tactical display with growing confusion. Every military doctrine he knew said that inferior forces should concentrate their strength to have any hope of effectiveness. Dispersing would only make them easier to hunt down and destroy. "Are they fleeing?" he asked. "Negative, sir. They're taking defensive positions, but in a pattern I don't recognize. Small groups, heavily camouflaged, positioned near critical infrastructure points." Over the following hours, reports continued to pour in from Thackrell's sensors. Human military units were vanishing from detection all across the planet. Not retreating, simply disappearing into the landscape like they had never existed. Their major cities continued to function normally, but military presence in those cities became nearly invisible. More disturbing were the signs of industrial activity. Human factories were working around the clock, but their energy signatures were changing in ways that suggested rapid retooling. Transportation networks were moving massive amounts of materials, but the destinations were obscured by what appeared to be deliberate camouflage. "Commander," Lieutenant Vexka said quietly, "permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "Sir, their behavior pattern doesn't match any of our conquest scenarios. They're not massing for defense, they're not fleeing, and they're not trying to negotiate." "What exactly are they doing?" Thackrell didn't have an answer. In all his previous campaigns, defeated species had followed predictable patterns. They either surrendered quickly, fought hopeless conventional battles, or descended into chaos and civil war. Humans appeared to be doing none of these things. Instead, they seemed to be preparing. 3 days after the destruction of NORAD, the first attacks began. They weren't what anyone expected. No desperate assaults on Crex positions, no suicide attacks against the fleet, no conventional military operations at all. Instead, the humans began to do something far more disturbing. They began to learn. The first incident occurred when a cloaked Crex scout ship landed near a human city to gather intelligence. The ship's stealth systems were perfect. No human technology should have been able to detect it. But somehow, within hours of landing, the landing site was surrounded by humans carrying primitive projectile weapons and homemade explosives. The scout team fought their way out easily enough. Human weapons couldn't penetrate Crex armor, and Crex weapons could vaporize human fighters instantly. But the engagement was recorded by hidden cameras, and within hours, footage of Crex technology was spreading across human communication networks. "How did they find us?" the scout team leader asked when he returned to the fleet. "Unknown, sir. Our stealth systems were functioning perfectly. No human sensor could have detected our landing. But humans, Thackrell was learning, didn't rely only on sensors. They had spotted the scout ship through careful observation, noting the absence of bird activity in a specific area, tracking the pattern of bent grass, following the faint electromagnetic signature that Crex engineers had never considered worth, masking because no primitive species should have been able to detect it. The second incident was worse. A Crex supply depot established on the dark side of Earth's moon was somehow discovered and attacked. The attacking force consisted of humans, in primitive spacesuits armed with chemical rockets and improvised weapons. They should have been wiped out instantly. Instead, they destroyed the depot. Not through superior firepower, they had none. Not through advanced technology. Theirs was laughably primitive. They succeeded through something far more dangerous. They had learned to think like Crex. The human assault team had studied the footage from the first encounter and identified weaknesses in Crex tactics. They knew that Crex warriors relied heavily on their armor and energy shields, so they used weapons designed to create electromagnetic pulses that disrupted both. They knew that Crex doctrine emphasized overwhelming force, so they attacked from multiple directions simultaneously to fragment the defense. They knew that Crex commanders expected rational behavior, so they used tactics that were completely insane by any reasonable standard. Most importantly, they had somehow acquired detailed schematics of Crex technology. "How is this possible?" Thackrell demanded as he reviewed the attack footage. "Our equipment is biometrically locked. No alien species should be able to access our systems." "Sir," his chief engineer said reluctantly, "the humans appear to have reverse-engineered our access protocols from the first engagement. They recorded our communication frequencies, analyzed our data transmissions, and created their own interface systems. That should take years of research. Yes, sir, it should. But they did it in 3 days. The reports kept coming. Human saboteurs were infiltrating Crex installations using stolen access codes. Human scientists were analyzing captured Crex weapons and building countermeasures. Human engineers were studying Crex ship designs and developing new attack strategies. Most disturbing of all, human military leaders were sharing their discoveries freely with their entire species. Every lesson learned, every weakness discovered, every tactical innovation was immediately broadcast to resistance cells around the globe. The humans weren't just learning, they were learning collectively, sharing knowledge at a speed that should have been impossible. Commander, his intelligence officer reported, we're detecting organized resistance activities on every inhabited continent. The humans have established what they call guerrilla networks, small independent units that operate without central command but coordinate their activities through encrypted communications. Thackrell studied the tactical display and growing frustration. Red markers indicated confirmed human resistance activity, and they covered the planet like a plague. Each marker represented a cell of fighters who knew exactly how to hurt Crex forces and were willing to die trying. How many fighters are we facing? He asked. Impossible to determine, sir. Human military forces have completely integrated with their civilian population. Any adult human could potentially be a combatant. Conservative estimates suggest several 100 million active resistance fighters. Several 100 million. Thackrell had conquered entire star systems with fewer people than Earth's resistance movement. And unlike other species, humans seem to view certain death as merely an occupational hazard. The final straw came when a human strike team somehow infiltrated his flagship. It should have been impossible. The ship was in deep space, protected by multiple layers of shields and sensors. The assault team consisted of 12 humans in primitive spacesuits, armed with improvised weapons. They had launched themselves from a concealed position on one of the system's outer planets, traveling for weeks in cold sleep to reach the fleet. They died, of course. Crex security forces killed them all within minutes of detection. But before they died, they had downloaded complete schematics of the flagship systems and transmitted the data back to Earth. More importantly, they had left behind a message. Commander Thackrell, the recorded voice of the human team leader, echoed through the ship's communication system. My name is Captain Sarah Mitchell, United Nations Special Forces. By the time you hear this, my team and I will be dead. We know this. We came anyway. The image showed a young human female, barely past adolescence by their species standards. She looked directly into the camera with eyes that held no fear, only determination. You asked us to surrender because resistance is futile, she continued. But you don't understand what you're fighting, Commander. You're not fighting our military. You're not fighting our government. You're fighting an idea. The idea that people should be free to choose their own destiny. Ideas don't die when you kill the people who carry them. They spread. They grow stronger. They inspire others to pick up the fight where we left off. The image flickered slightly, then stabilized. You came here expecting to conquer slaves. Instead, you're creating martyrs. Every person you kill makes 1,000 others more determined to resist. Every victory you win costs you more than you can afford to lose. You have better technology than us. You have superior weapons. You have advantages we can't match. But we have something you don't. We have nothing left to lose. And that makes us the most dangerous enemy you will ever face. The recording ended with Captain Mitchell's final words. See you in hell, Commander. Thackrell stared at the blank screen for long moments. Around him, his bridge crew maintained uncomfortable silence. Outside, Earth continued its slow rotation, its surface sparkling with lights that marked human cities still functioning, human industries still producing, human lives still continuing despite the alien occupation. But something had changed. The easy conquest that should have taken days was entering its third week. Human resistance was growing stronger instead of weaker. Crex casualties were mounting as humans learned to exploit every weakness in their tactics and technology. Most disturbing of all, intercepted human communications showed that they were treating the invasion not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to prove that no force in the universe could crush the human. Dr. Elena Vasquez tried to ignore the shackles around her wrists as the Crex transport ship shuddered through hyperspace. Around her, 200 other humans sat in cramped restraints, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and defiance that had become humanity's signature expression since the invasion began. The Crex had learned after 6 months of brutal fighting on Earth that humans were more dangerous when they died than when they lived. Every human killed in battle became a symbol that inspired 10 others to join the resistance. Every martyred fighter became a story that spread through human communication networks, turning ordinary people into warriors. So the Crex had changed tactics. Instead of trying to kill all the humans, they decided to scatter them across the galaxy, as slaves and specimens. Separate them from their homeworld, break their connections to each other, and let despair do what weapons could not. It was, General Thakmor had declared, a much more civilized solution. Dr. Vasquez almost smiled at the thought. The Crex had no idea what they had just done. "Elena," whispered the woman sitting beside her. Captain Lisa Wong had commanded a resistance cell in the ruins of Hong Kong before her capture. Even now, chained and bound for slavery, her voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You still have the data?" Elena nodded slightly. Hidden in a dental filling that Crex scanners couldn't detect was a microscopic storage device containing everything humanity had learned about their alien captors. Ship designs, weapon specifications, tactical assessments, and most importantly, detailed biological analyses of every species in the Galactic Council. The Karathi prisoners from Cell Block 7 have been asking questions about human resistance tactics. Lisa continued quietly. "I think they might be interested in more than just conversation." Elena had noticed the Karathi too. The tall, thin aliens with their pale gray skin and large dark eyes had been captured during some minor rebellion in the Outer Rim territories. They had been slaves to the Crex Dominion for over 300 years, and their spirits should have been completely broken by now, but something had changed since the humans arrived. The Karathi were whispering among themselves in their musical language, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever Crex guards approached. More importantly, they had been watching the humans with something that looked dangerously close to hope. The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with a jarring sensation that made several humans groan in discomfort. Through the small viewports, Elena could see their destination, a frozen world covered in ice and marked by massive industrial complexes that scarred the planet's surface like wounds. Glacius 7th, announced the Crex overseer, his mechanical translator making his words sound even more harsh than usual. "Mining world, rich in deuterium and rare minerals, cold enough to kill most species within minutes of surface exposure." The overseer's mandibles clicked in what Elena had learned was the Crex equivalent of laughter. "Perfect place for troublesome slaves who need to learn discipline. Work hard, obey orders, and you might survive long enough to see next year's supply ship." But Elena was studying the planet below with the trained eye of a xenobiologist. Glacius 7 was cold, yes. Probably around -60°C at the equator. The atmosphere was thin but breathable for humans with minimal equipment. Most importantly, the industrial complexes suggested a large slave population, working in conditions that would be considered intolerable by Galactic Council standards. Perfect conditions for what humans did best: survive in impossible circumstances and make friends with fellow victims of oppression. The landing was rough, deliberately so. Crex doctrine emphasized that newly captured slaves needed to understand their helplessness immediately. The transport settled onto a landing pad surrounded by weapon emplacements and guard towers, while harsh floodlights cut through the planet's eternal twilight. Elena and the other humans were herded off the ship into the freezing air. The cold hit like a physical blow, but Elena noticed that several of the humans were already adapting, pulling their clothing tighter, moving to conserve body heat, clustering together for warmth. Basic survival instincts that had served humanity well during ice ages on Earth The Karathi prisoners were less fortunate. Their thin bodies and minimal clothing made them shiver uncontrollably in the cold. Several collapsed within minutes of leaving the ship's heated interior. Elena made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Lisa," she whispered to the former resistance commander, "pass the word. We share our body heat with the Karathi. Keep them alive. Elena, we don't have enough warmth to go around. If we help them, some of us might freeze." "Then some of us freeze," Elena said firmly. "We don't leave people behind. Ever." It was such a simple thing. Humans sharing their meager warmth with alien slaves who were dying from the cold. In the harsh calculus of survival, it made no logical sense. Helping the Karathi would only weaken the humans and reduce their own chances of survival. But it was also the most human thing imaginable. Within minutes, the human prisoners had arranged themselves around the Karathi, sharing body heat and helping the weaker aliens stay on their feet. The Crex guards noticed but didn't interfere. If the humans wanted to exhaust themselves helping inferior species, that was their choice. What the guards didn't notice was the way the Karathi stared at their human helpers. 300 years of slavery had taught them that survival meant looking out for yourself first and foremost. The idea that another species would risk their own lives to help strangers was so alien to their experience that they could barely comprehend it. Elena saw the exact moment when understanding dawned in one Karathi's large, dark eyes. The alien reached out with a trembling hand and touched Elena's arm, speaking softly in his musical language. Lisa, who had picked up some Karathi during her imprisonment, translated quietly. "He says thank you in their formal dialect, but the way he said it, it's the form they use for life debts. He thinks we just saved his life." "We did save his life," Elena replied. "No, Elena, you don't understand. In Karathi culture, a life debt is sacred. It can only be repaid by saving the life of the one who saved you. He just swore to protect us with his life if necessary." Elena looked around at the other Karathi prisoners, all of whom were staring at the humans with the same expression of dawning comprehension. "How many of them do you think feel the same way?" Lisa's answer was quiet but carried the weight of prophecy. All of them. The slave barracks on Glacier 7th were designed to break spirits through isolation and despair. Each species was housed separately, communication between groups was forbidden, and the work schedules ensured that prisoners were too exhausted to think about anything except survival. It had worked perfectly for centuries. The various slave species, Karathi, Zephyrians, Valkyrie, and dozens of others, had learned to keep their heads down, do their work, and accept their fate. Rebellion was impossible when every species was divided from the others and too weak to fight. Then the humans arrived and ruined everything. Elena watched from her bunk as Captain Wong organized the human prisoners into work crews. Not just any. Work crews, integrated teams that included Karathi translators, Zephyrian technical specialists, and Valkyrie who had learned to navigate the mining tunnels in the dark. "The guards won't like this," warned a Karathi engineer named Sirthak. His mathematical mind was perfectly suited for calculating ore extraction rates, but 3 centuries of slavery had taught him to be cautious about anything that might anger their captors. "The guards can kiss my ass," Wong replied cheerfully. Her words translated into Karathi musical tones that somehow managed to convey both defiance and humor. Elena bit back a laugh. Lisa had always been direct, but hearing profanity translated into the elegant Karathi language was surreal. More importantly, it was working. The Karathi had begun to relax around the humans, their formal speech patterns becoming more casual as they grew comfortable with their new allies. The Zephyrians, with their crystal-based physiology that made them naturally resistant to cold, had begun sharing warming techniques they had developed over their centuries of imprisonment. Most remarkable were the Valkyrie. The small, furry humanoids had been slaves for so long that they had almost forgotten their own language. But the humans' curiosity about Valkyrie culture had awakened memories they thought were lost forever. Elena had spent hours listening to elderly Valkyrie tell stories of their homeworld, carefully recording everything in case the knowledge might be useful later. The Crex guards noticed the increased cooperation, but dismissed it as irrelevant. Slaves. Working together more efficiently was actually beneficial to mining operations. Production rates had increased by 20% since the humans arrived, which made the overseers look good in their reports to Dominion headquarters. What they didn't notice was the other kind of knowledge being shared. Elena had begun teaching basic medical techniques to anyone who would listen. Simple things: how to treat frostbite, how to prevent infection, how to recognize signs of malnutrition. But she was also sharing more advanced concepts with the aliens who could understand them. Surthak, it turned out, had been a systems engineer before his capture. His mathematical mind absorbed Elena's explanations of human network theory like a sponge. Within weeks, he was helping her design communication systems that could operate without detection. The Zephyrians, with their crystalline biology, were natural chemists. Elena's knowledge of human biochemistry, combined with their understanding of crystal-based reactions, led to the development of new medicines that could treat injuries and illnesses in multiple species. Most importantly, the Valkyrie had spent centuries learning to move through the mining complex without being detected. Their natural stealth abilities, combined with human tactical knowledge, created an underground network that could pass messages anywhere on the planet without Crex knowledge. 6 months after arriving on Glacier 7, Elena received a message that changed everything. It came through the Valkyrie network, passed from slave to slave across thousands of miles of frozen terrain. 3 words, repeated in dozens of languages: Earth still fights. The message included data stolen from Crex communication networks. The human resistance had not only survived, it was growing. More than that, human prisoners on other worlds had begun organizing their fellow slaves. The Crex policy of scattering humans across the galaxy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking human resistance, they had spread it. Elena, Lisa said quietly during their rest period, we need to talk about the bigger picture here. They met in a maintenance tunnel that the Valkyrie had assured them was free of surveillance devices. Elena, Lisa, Surthak, and representatives from each of the slave species gathered in the cramped space. The Crex made a mistake, Elena began without preamble. They assumed that separating us from Earth would break our spirit. Instead, they gave us something more valuable: the opportunity to meet you. Surthak's large eyes reflected the dim light from their improvised torch. What do you mean? I mean that humans aren't special because we're stronger or smarter than other species. We're special because we refuse to accept that anyone deserves to be a slave. And now we're not alone anymore. Lisa nodded. The data from the Resistance shows that human prisoners on 17 different worlds have made contact with local slave populations. In every case, the other species have begun organizing resistance movements. But the Crex are too strong, protested a Zephyrian named Crystal Song. Their technology is superior. Their military is vast. How can slaves fight battleships? Elena smiled, remembering Captain Sarah Mitchell's final message to Commander Thackrell. We don't fight their technology, we fight their assumptions. Explain. The Crex assume that slaves will remain divided by species barriers. They assume that different biology means we can't work together. They assume that centuries of oppression have broken your spirits permanently. All reasonable assumptions, Surthak said carefully. All wrong assumptions, Lisa replied. Elena has been teaching Karathi medical techniques to Zephyrians. Crystal Song has been showing humans how to work with crystalline technology. The Valkyrie have been sharing stealth techniques with everyone. We're not separate species anymore, Elena continued. We're something new. A community of people who chose to help each other instead of just surviving alone. And that's something the Crex can't fight with battleships. The meeting continued for hours, with representatives from each species sharing knowledge and resources. By the time they separated, they had laid the groundwork for something unprecedented in galactic history. A multi-species resistance movement based on cooperation rather than conquest. But the real breakthrough came 3 months later, when the supply ship arrived from Crex space. Elena watched through a hidden camera as the ship disgorged its cargo of new prisoners. More humans, of course, but also members of species she had never seen before. Tall, elegant beings with flowing tentacles, small, quick creatures with metallic skin, beings that seemed to be made of living light, all of them slaves, all of them broken by years of oppression, all of them about to meet humanity for the first time. "Lisa," Elena said quietly, "I think we're going to need more medical supplies." The former resistance commander laughed. "Why? Are you planning to save the galaxy one alien at a time?" Elena watched as human prisoners began helping the newcomers adjust to the freezing conditions, sharing warmth and food without being asked. Watched as Karathi engineers began teaching the newcomers how to work the mining equipment safely. Watched as Zephyrians offered crystalline supplements to aliens whose biology was incompatible with standard nutrition. "No," she said finally. "I'm planning to save the galaxy one person at a time. Human, Karathi, Zephyrian, Valkyrie. It doesn't matter what species they are. People are people." 6 months later, production reports from Glacius 7 showed remarkable efficiency improvements. The mining operation was exceeding all targets, and interspecies cooperation had reached levels that impressed even hardened Crex overseers. What the reports didn't show was that the increased cooperation was being used to build something the Crex had never imagined: a network of communication, mutual aid, and shared knowledge that connected slaves across multiple star systems. The network had a simple founding principle, borrowed from humanity's darkest historical periods: we go together or not at all. On 17 worlds and dozens of species among millions of enslaved beings, the message was spreading: Earth still fights. And now, they are not alone. The Crex Dominion was about to learn that some ideas are more contagious than any plague. The idea that all people deserve freedom was spreading through their slave populations like wildfire, carried by humans who refused to accept that resistance was futile. But more than that, it was being adapted and improved by alien minds that brought their own perspectives to the concept of liberation. Karathi mathematical precision, Zephyrian chemical knowledge, Valkyrie stealth techniques, all being combined with human stubbornness to create something entirely new. Helena looked up at the frozen sky of Glacius 7 and smiled. Somewhere up there, the Crex fleet was probably congratulating itself on successfully dispersing the human threat across the galaxy. They had no idea that they had just armed the largest slave rebellion in galactic history. The spread was complete. Now came the uprising. Supreme Calculator Zethanine processed the incoming data streams with growing confusion. His mechanical mind, designed to find patterns in chaos and predict outcomes with mathematical precision, was failing to comprehend what the numbers were telling him. Across 47 worlds in Vorthon space, productivity among slave populations had increased by an average of 38% over the past year. Efficiency ratings were at historical highs. Interspecies cooperation had reached levels that exceeded all previous models. By every logical measurement, the Vorthon Collective's slave management systems were performing better than they had in centuries. So why did Zethanine feel a cold certainty that everything was about to collapse? Calculator, his aide Plexifor approached with the careful precision that marked all Vorthon interactions. The monthly behavioral analysis reports are complete. Do you wish to review the anomalies? Display the data. Holographic charts filled the air around them, showing behavioral patterns among the various slave species. Zethnine's compound eyes moved rapidly as he absorbed the information, his mechanical mind automatically calculating probabilities and correlations. The patterns were subtle but undeniable. Slave populations that had never communicated before were now sharing resources. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together on joint projects. Most disturbing of all, slaves were beginning to ask questions about things that had nothing to do with their assigned tasks. Questions about the Vorthon governmental structure. Questions about why some beings were free while others were enslaved. Questions about whether the current system was the only possible way to organize society. When did these behavioral changes begin? Zethanine asked. Correlation analysis indicates the changes started approximately 18 months ago, coinciding with the arrival of human specimens on our worlds. Zethanine had heard about the humans, of course. The Crex Dominion's disastrous invasion of Earth had become a source of quiet amusement throughout the Vorthan collective. Leave it to the militaristic Crex to turn a simple conquest into a protracted guerrilla war. The decision to scatter human prisoners across the galaxy as slaves had seemed logical. Separate the troublemakers from their homeworld, prevent them from coordinating resistance, and let despair break their spirits over time. Simple mathematics. But mathematics, Zeth9 was learning, sometimes failed to account for variables that couldn't be quantified. "Show me the reports from Production Facility 7, he ordered. The hologram shifted to display data from a factory complex on the industrial world of Mechanicus III. The facility produced advanced electronics using a workforce of enslaved Korathi, Valkyrie, and other species. Recently, it had also received a shipment of human prisoners. Production efficiency has increased by 42% since human integration, Plex4 reported. Quality control metrics show marked improvement. Interspecies cooperation has reached unprecedented levels. On the surface, it was exactly what Vorthan efficiency experts had hoped for. But Zeth9 noticed something else in the data: patterns of resource allocation that didn't match standard protocols. "The humans are sharing their food rations," he observed. "Correct. Analysis indicates they are distributing nutritional resources based on biological need rather than individual allocation. The practice has spread to other species in the facility, and they are training other species in technical skills that are not part of their assigned roles." Also correct. Humans with engineering backgrounds have been teaching advanced concepts to Korathi workers, despite having no authorization to do so. Zeth9's mechanical mind processed the implications. The Vorthan system depended on keeping slave populations ignorant and divided. Slaves were assigned specific roles based on their species' natural abilities, and were forbidden from learning skills that might make them more versatile or dangerous. But the humans were ignoring those restrictions completely. Worse, they were teaching other species to ignore them as well. "Calculator," Plex4 said carefully. "There is another anomaly in the data. The humans appear to be singing." "Explain." "Audio monitoring has detected coordinated vocalizations among human workers during rest periods. The behavior has spread to other species, who are adapting the vocalizations to their own physiological capabilities." Zeth9 accessed the audio files and listened to the strange harmonies echoing through the factory dormitories. The sounds were unlike anything in Vorthan cultural databases, not quite music, not quite communication, but something that seemed to combine elements of both. "Translation?" he asked. "Problematic. The vocalizations contain concepts that do not translate well into mathematical language. References to concepts such as hope, brotherhood, and freedom appear frequently. The word freedom triggered alarm protocols in Zeth9's processing matrix. Freedom was a dangerous concept, a variable that could not be controlled or predicted. In Vorthan philosophy, freedom was chaos, and chaos was inefficiency. "Increase surveillance on all facilities with human populations," he ordered. "I want detailed behavioral analysis on every human prisoner and any slaves who have had contact with them." The data that came back over the following weeks was disturbing beyond Zeth9's capacity to calculate. On world after world, the pattern was the same. Human prisoners were not just adapting to slave conditions, they were transforming them. Facilities that had operated on the same brutal efficiency for centuries were suddenly becoming something different. On Mechanicus III, enslaved workers had begun organizing study groups where humans taught mathematics and engineering to other species. Production remained high, but the quality of work had improved dramatically as workers began understanding the principles behind their tasks, rather than simply following rote procedures. On the agricultural world of Verdania, human prisoners had introduced crop rotation techniques that increased yields while improving soil quality, but they had also taught other species about concepts like worker safety and fair distribution of resources. Most alarming was the mining world of Excavatus Prime, where human prisoners had organized the first multi-species strike in Vorthan history. The strike had lasted only 6 hours before overseers restored order. But during those 6 hours, production had stopped completely across 17 different facilities. The strike had failed, but it had proven something that shook the foundation of Vorthon philosophy. Slaves from different species could coordinate their actions across vast distances, acting with unified purpose despite having no central command structure. How did they communicate? Zeth9 demanded when the reports reached his desk. Our monitoring systems detected no unauthorized transmissions. Unknown, calculator. Analysis suggests they used a combination of techniques including modified work songs, pattern-based message systems incorporated into their daily tasks, and coordination through sympathetic overseers. Sympathetic overseers? Several Vorthon facility managers have been observed implementing policy changes that favor slave welfare over pure efficiency. When questioned, they claim the changes improve long-term productivity metrics. Zeth9. Access the psychological profiles of the affected overseers. All were rational, efficient administrators with decades of experience managing slave populations. None had shown any previous tendency toward what the Vorthon Collective classified as emotional decision-making. Yet somehow, exposure to human, prisoners had changed their behavior patterns in ways that mathematical analysis couldn't explain. The truth was even worse than Zeth9 suspected. On Excavatus Prime, facility manager Quexes7 sat in his office reviewing production reports that should have filled him with satisfaction. Efficiency was up, injuries were down, and worker morale was at levels he had never seen before. But instead of satisfaction, Quexes7 felt something that had no place in Vorthon psychology: doubt. It had started when the human prisoners arrived. Quexes7 had expected the usual pattern: initial resistance followed by gradual acceptance of their new reality. Humans, according to the behavioral profiles, were emotional beings who would eventually break under the weight of hopeless circumstances. Instead, they had done something unprecedented. They had begun to care about their fellow prisoners. Quexes7 had watched through security monitors as humans shared their meager rations with starving Karathi workers, had observed them teaching first aid techniques to Valkyrie who had been injured in mining accidents, had seen them organizing recreational activities that included every species in the facility. Most disturbing was their effect on the other prisoners. Species that had barely tolerated each other's presence were now working together, sharing resources and, most troubling of all, asking questions. Manager Quexes7? His aide Nexa2 entered the office with the mechanical precision that marked all Vorthon interactions. The human-designated Elena Vasquez has requested a meeting with you. Quexes7 had been expecting this. Dr. Vasquez was clearly the informal leader among the human prisoners, and her influence extended far beyond her own species. Other slaves looked to her for guidance in ways that violated every principle of Vorthon slave management. What does she want? She claims to have suggestions for improving facility operations. Under normal circumstances, Quexes7 would have rejected such a request immediately. Slaves did not make suggestions to their overseers. But his recent reports had been so positive that he was curious about what the human might say. Bring her to conference room 7, he decided. Standard security protocols. Dr. Vasquez entered the room flanked by 2 guards, her hands bound with neural restraints that would deliver painful shocks if she made any sudden movements, but her posture showed no fear. Only the kind of confident determination that Quexes7 had learned to associate with humans. Manager Quexes7, she said, somehow making his designation sound like a respectful title rather than a mere administrative label. Thank you for agreeing to see me. You requested this meeting, Dr. Vasquez. What do you want? Elena sat down carefully, mindful of the restraints. I want to help you solve a problem you don't know you have yet. Quexes7's analytical mind immediately began calculating possible deceptions. Explain. Your efficiency reports look good on paper, but they're hiding a structural weakness in your operation. You're managing slaves, but you could be leading workers. The difference will determine whether your facility thrives or fails when the real challenges come. What challenges? Elena's smile was sad but determined. Manager, you've seen the reports from Earth, haven't you? 6 months of warfare and the human resistance is still growing. The Crex can't break us through force, so they're trying to break us through separation. But they don't understand what they're actually doing. Enlighten me. They're spreading human ideas throughout the galaxy, ideas about cooperation, about the dignity of all sentient beings, about the possibility that things could be better than they are. Those ideas are taking root in every species we encounter. Quexus7's mechanical mind processed this information. You are suggesting that human ideology is somehow contagious? I'm suggesting that hope is contagious, and hope is the most dangerous thing you can give to people who have nothing left to lose. The meeting continued for over an hour, with Elena explaining concepts that Quexus7's mathematical mind struggled to quantify. She spoke of worker motivation, of the difference between compliance and commitment, of the long-term costs of ruling through fear. Most disturbing was her analysis of the galactic political situation. Manager, your system works as long as everyone believes it's the only possible system. But what happens when slaves across the galaxy start communicating with each other? When they realize that their suffering isn't inevitable, but chosen by those in power? Such communication is impossible. Our monitoring systems prevent unauthorized contact between facilities. Elena's laugh was gentle but confident. Your monitoring systems are designed to detect technology. They can't detect friendship. Explain. Every facility has guards, technicians, administrators, people who interact with multiple slave populations. What happens when those people start to question whether the current system is really the most efficient one? What happens when they realize that treating slaves like people produces better results than treating them like machines? Quexus7 felt a cold certainty settling in his processing matrix. Elena was describing exactly what was happening to him. The gradual realization that his facility's improved performance was directly related to treating the prisoners as rational beings rather than mere resources. You are attempting to subvert Vorthan authority, he said carefully. I'm attempting to help you succeed by showing you a better way to manage your facility. But I understand why that sounds like subversion to you. Elena leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. Manager, I need you to understand something. Whether you help us or not, change is coming. Human resistance isn't just military, it's ideological. We're not trying to conquer the galaxy, we're trying to free it. The Vorthan Collective has maintained order for thousands of years. The Vorthan Collective has maintained control for thousands of years. That's not the same thing as order. The conversation ended with no concrete agreements, but Quexus7 found himself unable to dismiss Elena's words. Over the following weeks, he began to notice things that his mathematical training had taught him to ignore. The fear in his guards' eyes when they thought no one was watching. The exhaustion among his administrative staff as they struggled to maintain impossible productivity targets. The gradual degradation of equipment and infrastructure as resources were constantly diverted to military applications. Most disturbing was his growing realization that Elena was right about one thing. Change was indeed coming, whether the Vorthan Collective was ready or not. The proof came when the rebellion finally began. It didn't start with violence or dramatic proclamations. Instead, it began with something far more dangerous to authoritarian systems: coordinated non-compliance. On the same day, at the same time, slaves across 17 Vorthan worlds simply stopped working. Not permanently, just long enough to prove they could. 8 hours of silence in factories, mines, and agricultural facilities. 8 hours of complete stillness in the machinery of oppression. When work resumed, it was with a subtle but unmistakable message. We are choosing to work, not being forced to work. And choices can be changed. The rebellion spread like wildfire through the Vorthan Collective's slave populations, not through military conquest but through something far more powerful. The realization that cooperation between oppressed peoples was possible. Karathi mathematical precision, combined with human organizational skills. Valkyrie stealth techniques enhanced by human tactical knowledge. Zephyrian chemical expertise, guided by human medical understanding. Each species brought their own strengths to the growing resistance movement, but they were united by a simple principle borrowed from humanity's darkest hours. We go together or not at all. Supreme Calculator, Zethanine watched his orderly mathematical universe crumble into chaos as reports flooded in from across Vorthon space. Slave revolts were spreading faster than his security forces could respond. Worse, the revolts were being coordinated across multiple worlds simultaneously. Calculator, Plex4 reported with mechanical precision that barely concealed panic. We have confirmed uprisings on 37 worlds. Productivity has dropped by 67% across affected facilities. Military forces are requesting permission to use lethal force to restore order. Zeth9 calculated the mathematics of suppression. It would require diverting most of the Vorthan military from border defense. It would cost trillions of credits. It would destroy the very infrastructure they were trying to protect. Most importantly, it would prove Elena Vasquez's point about the difference between control and order. Negative, he said finally. Deploy negotiation teams to all affected facilities. Find out what the slaves want. The answer, when it came, was both simple and impossible to grant. They wanted to be treated like people instead of property. Across the galaxy, the human infection was spreading. Not through conquest, but through the radical idea that all sentient beings deserve dignity and freedom. The Galactic Council was about to learn what the Elder had tried to warn them about. Humans weren't dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because they were contagious. High Counselor Vexithara stood before the emergency assembly on Zenthari Prime, her four eyes reflecting the harsh light of alarm beacons that had been flashing for 3 days straight. Around her, the great council chamber that had once hosted peaceful debates about trade routes and mining rights now resembled a military command center under siege. Representatives from across the galaxy crowded the chamber, their faces showing expressions ranging from confusion to outright panic. The elegant Zelithian nobles who had once glided through these halls with absolute confidence now huddled in defensive clusters. The mechanical precision of the Vorthan delegates had given way to frantic calculations that produced no solutions. Even the proud Crex warriors looked shaken as reports continued to pour in from across their empire. Order, Vexithara commanded, her voice carrying the authority of millennia of noble breeding. We will proceed with the emergency session. General, Thakmor, report on the military situation. The scarred Crex commander stood slowly, his red hide bearing fresh wounds from recent battles. His voice, usually filled with warrior confidence, now carried the bitter tone of someone who had learned hard truths too late. The situation is unprecedented, he began, each word seeming to cost him effort. 18 months ago, we controlled every world in our domain through superior firepower. Today we control nothing. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber. The Crex Dominion commanded the most powerful military in the galaxy. The idea that they could lose control of their own territory seemed impossible. Explain, Vexthara demanded. The humans have turned our own subjects against us, Thakmor said grimly. Not through conquest, through conversion. Species that have served the Dominion for centuries are now openly rebelling. Worse, they're coordinating their actions across multiple star systems. Supreme Calculator. Zethanine's mechanical voice cut through the chamber's noise. Confirmed. Vorthan space reports similar patterns. Slave populations that had been stable for millennia are now engaging in coordinated resistance. Mathematical models indicate the rebellion is spreading faster than our ability to contain it. How is this possible? Demanded Senator Quartek of the Rigelian Commerce Guild. These are primitive species, slaves. How can they threaten civilized governments? General Thakmor's laugh was harsh and bitter. Because they're not fighting like slaves anymore. They're fighting like the humans taught them, as if they believe they deserve to be free. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Vexthara noticed that some delegates remained ominously silent. The representatives from the Outer Rim territories, the ones who governed through negotiation rather than force, were watching the proceedings with expressions that suggested they had seen this coming. What about Earth itself? She asked, cutting through the chaos. Surely the human homeworld has been pacified by now. Thakmor's expression grew even darker. Earth is problematic. Commander Thackrell's forces have been reinforced 3 times. We now have over 200 ships in the Sol system. supported by ground forces that should be capable of conquering entire star systems. And the humans are still fighting. Every city we destroy becomes a symbol that inspires 10 new resistance cells. Every human we kill becomes a martyr whose story spreads through their communication networks. We're not winning a war. We're creating a mythology. The truth was even worse than Thakmor was willing to admit in public. The Crex military, trained for quick decisive victories, had been trapped in a grinding war of attrition that played to humanity's greatest strengths. Humans didn't need to win battles. They just needed to survive them long enough to learn from their mistakes, and they were learning faster than the Crex could adapt. "What about the scattered human prisoners?" asked Counselor Nexivari of the Epsilon Collective. "Surely separating them from their homeworld has broken their coordination." Supreme Calculator Zeth9 processed this question with mechanical precision before answering. "The dispersal strategy has failed catastrophically. Analysis indicates that human prisoners have not only maintained their resistance, they have exported it to other species." Impossible. Mathematical certainty suggests otherwise. Human prisoners have integrated with local slave populations on 47 worlds across 3 different galactic territories. In every case, previously compliant slave populations have begun engaging in resistance activities within 6 months of human contact. Vexathara felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. The elegant strategies that had maintained galactic order for millennia were crumbling before her eyes, and she was beginning to understand why. "It's the ideology," she said quietly, the words carrying across the suddenly silent chamber. "They're not spreading military tactics, they're spreading ideas." Elder Kethvar had tried to warn them, but the council had been too arrogant to listen. The predecessors had faced the same threat 50,000 years ago, and had chosen extinction rather than adaptation. Now, the current galactic civilization was about to learn the same lesson. "Ideas can be countered with better ideas," protested Senator Quartek. "We offer civilization, order, prosperity under proper leadership. What can primitives offer that could compete with that?" The answer came from an unexpected source. A small viewing screen near the chamber's edge flickered to life, showing a transmission from the Outer Rim territories. The face that appeared belonged to Governor Alextar of the Harmony Coalition, one of the few galactic governments that ruled through cooperation rather than domination. "Counselors," Alextar said, his voice carrying across the chamber without invitation, "I bring a message from the Free Worlds Alliance." "The what?" Vexthara demanded. "The Free Worlds Alliance," Alextar repeated calmly. 47 worlds that have chosen to leave their respective empires and form a new government based on principles of cooperation, equality, and mutual aid. I'm transmitting formal notice of our independence from all current galactic authorities. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates realized what they were hearing. Nearly 50 worlds, representing billions of beings, had simply declared themselves free from the established order. "You have no authority," General Thakmor roared. "The Crex Dominion does not recognize your so-called independence." "That is your choice, General," Alextar replied calmly. "But you should know that our new government includes several former Crex worlds, 3 Vorthan systems, and 12 Zilithian colonies. They voted to join us freely after their populations decided they preferred cooperation to conquest." Vexathara's world seemed to be tilting beneath her feet. "Voted? Species don't vote on their governments. Order comes from proper authority." "Counselor," Alextar said gently, "that's exactly the kind of thinking that led to this situation. People don't want to be governed, they want to be represented. The humans didn't teach us how to fight your empires. They taught us how to build something better." The transmission continued for another hour, with Alextar explaining the structure of their new alliance. Representatives chosen by popular vote, resources shared based on need rather than power, decisions made through consensus rather than domination. It was everything the established galactic order had been designed to prevent. When the transmission ended, the council chamber fell into stunned silence. For the first time in galactic history, a significant portion of civilized space had simply opted out of the existing system. "Military response?" General Thakmor asked. though his voice lacked its usual confidence. With what forces? Vexthara replied bitterly. Half our fleets are tied up fighting rebellions on our own worlds. The other half are needed to maintain control over the territories we still hold. Supreme Calculator Zeth9 processed the strategic situation with mechanical precision. Military action against the Free Worlds Alliance would require committing 73% of our combined forces. Success probability is rated at 31%. Cost in resources and casualties would exceed the value of the territories in question. The mathematics were clear. They couldn't win a war against people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. There must be another solution, Senator Quartek insisted. Negotiate with the humans directly. Find out what they want. Surely they can be bought or convinced to call off their rebellion. They've already told us what they want, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Every head turned to see Admiral Chen Wei of the United Nations Space Command walking into the chamber flanked by an honor guard that included humans, Karathi, Valkyrie, and dozens of other species. Her uniform bore the insignia of Earth's military, but the beings with her wore no uniforms at all. They were civilians, representatives of the Free Worlds Alliance. How did you get here? Vexithera demanded. Centauri Prime is protected by the most advanced defense grid in the galaxy. Admiral Chen smiled. Your defense grid was designed to stop invading fleets, Counselor. It wasn't designed to stop a diplomatic mission that was invited by half your own population. The terrible truth became clear as security reports flooded in. The defense grid hadn't failed. It had been shut down by its own operators, Xanthari citizens who had decided they wanted to hear what the humans had to say. You're under arrest for violation of galactic sovereignty, General Thakmor snarled, reaching for his sidearm. Even the rigid hierarchies of the minor powers were transforming into representative governments. It's over, Vexithara said, the words carrying finality that resonated through the chamber. Everything we built, everything we preserved, it's all ending. No, Counselor, Elena said gently. It's all beginning. The formal dissolution of the Galactic Council took 3 days, not because of bureaucratic complexity, but because so many beings wanted to witness the moment when thousands of years of authoritarian rule finally ended. The ceremony was held in the same chamber where Elder Kethfar had delivered his warning. Representatives from hundreds of worlds watched as the old council formally transferred authority to the new Alliance Congress, a body where every world, regardless of size or power, would have an equal voice. High Counselor Vexithara stood at the podium for the last time, her 4 eyes reflecting lights from the crystal spires that had once symbolized galactic order. Around her, the assembled delegates waited to hear her final words as the representative of the old system. I have spent my entire life believing that civilization required hierarchy, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I believed that some beings were naturally suited to rule, while others were meant to serve. I believed that order could only come from the top down. She paused, looking out at the diverse crowd of beings who had gathered to witness this moment. Humans sat beside Karathi. Valkyrie delegates conversed quietly with Zephyrian representatives. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together to plan their common future. I was wrong, she continued. True order doesn't come from authority imposed from above. It comes from cooperation chosen freely by equals. The humans didn't defeat us through superior weapons or better tactics. They defeated us by showing us a better way to live. Elena Vasquez, now serving as Earth's representative to the Alliance Congress, stood and addressed the former High Counselor directly. Counselor Vexithara, the Zilithian Federation has requested that you serve as their cultural advisor to the Alliance. Your knowledge of galactic history and your experience in diplomacy would be valuable assets to our new government. You would trust me with such responsibility? After everything I represented? We would trust you to help us build something better than what came before, Elena replied. That's what the Alliance is about. Redemption, cooperation, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. General Thakmor, who had spent 3 days wrestling with his conscience, finally stepped forward. Admiral Chen, he said formally, I request permission to return to Crex space and serve the new Republic. Permission granted, General, Chen replied. Though I should warn you, your new job will be a lot harder than your old one. It's easier to rule through fear than to govern through consent. The former Crex commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Admiral, I spent 6 months trying to conquer Earth and failed. I think I can handle the challenge of serving Crex citizens instead of dominating them. Supreme Calculator. Zeth9 approached the podium with mechanical precision, but there was something different in his bearing. Something that suggested his calculations had led him to conclusions that surprised even his mathematical mind. Representatives of the Alliance Congress, he said formally. The Vorthon Commonwealth requests technical assistance in transitioning from a slave-based economy to a cooperative one. Our mathematical models indicate significant short-term efficiency losses during the transition period. We'll help however we can, Elena assured him. But calculator, you should know that the efficiency losses are temporary. Our models show that cooperative economies are actually more productive in the long run than coercive ones. How is this possible? Coercion ensures compliance. Elena smiled. Because people work harder when they're working for themselves than when they're working for someone else. It's the difference between doing the minimum required and doing your best. As the ceremony concluded, representatives from across the galaxy began planning the future. Trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Scientific cooperation that shared knowledge freely instead of hoarding it. Cultural exchange programs that celebrated diversity instead of enforcing uniformity. Most importantly, they began planning safeguards to ensure that the new system would never become as rigid and oppressive as the old one. Regular elections, term limits, constitutional protections for minority rights, and most crucially, the absolute right of any world to leave the Alliance if they chose to do so. The moment we stop being a choice, Admiral Chen told the assembled representatives, we become just another empire, and empires always fall eventually. 3 years later, Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the Alliance flagship Harmony, watching Earth through the viewport as the ship prepared for departure. The blue world looked the same as it always had, but everything else had changed. The Crex fleet was gone, replaced by a joint human alliance task force dedicated to exploration and peaceful contact with new species. The orbital installations that had once been military fortresses were now research stations and diplomatic facilities. Most importantly, Earth was no longer alone. The Alliance included over 3,000 worlds now, with new members joining every month as word spread that there was an alternative to the old systems of domination and control. Any regrets? Admiral Chen asked, joining Elena at the viewport. About what? About how it all turned out. We started this fight just trying to survive. Now we're responsible for half the galaxy. Elena considered the question carefully. No regrets about the outcome, she said finally. But I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the Council had listened to the Elder's warning, if they had approached us as equals instead of trying to conquer us. You think it would have been different? I think we would have reached the same destination through a much less painful route, Elena replied. But maybe some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Admiral Chen nodded. The Explorer Corps is reporting contact with 17 new species in the Outer Rim, all primitive by our standards but showing signs of developing spaceflight within the next few centuries. What's the approach plan? Same as always, peaceful contact, cultural exchange, and an invitation to join the Alliance when they're ready. No conquest, no coercion, no attempts to guide their development for their own good. Elena smiled. The Elder would be proud. We learned his lesson, even if it took us longer than it should have. The Harmony departed Earth orbit, carrying its mixed crew of humans and aliens toward the unexplored regions of the galaxy. Behind them, the Alliance continued to grow, one world at a time, one choice at a time. In the ruins of the old council chamber on Zenthari Prime, the archive pillar pulsed quietly with stored memories. Deep in its crystal matrix, the image of Elder Kethavar flickered briefly into existence as if checking on the children he had tried to guide so long ago. For just a moment, the ancient face showed something that might have been satisfaction. The warning had been given, the truth had been spoken, and finally, after 50,000 years, someone had listened. The humans had indeed been unstoppable. Not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through the simple radical belief that all beings deserved freedom and dignity. The elder's image faded back into memory, leaving behind only the soft glow of crystal and the echo of laughter, not the mocking laughter of the council that had dismissed his warning, but the joyful laughter of beings who had discovered that cooperation was stronger than conquest. The truth had set them free, and freedom, as it turned out, was indeed contagious.